Hi, my name is Alex. I never thought a family dinner could mark a turning point in my life, but that night changed everything for me. We were all gathered around a table in the house where we grew up, surrounded by memories, laughter, and also, as always, an atmosphere filled with tension that no one wanted to admit. My father, sitting across the table, had that serious look I knew all too well, a look that for years had been a mix of disapproval and demand. As dinner progressed, I felt the air thicken, a mix of awkward silences and fleeting glances between my siblings and my parents. I was calm, as always, trying not to draw attention to myself, keeping to my space, not expecting anything special from the evening. Then, without warning, my father broke the silence with a sentence that resonated throughout the room. "I'm proud of all my children, except for the one sitting over there, who looks like a loser." It was as if time froze for an instant. My brother's laughter erupted, as if that sentence were the funniest joke in the world, and I just stood there, frozen, my heart pounding, feeling every word like a direct blow. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't want to, but because I was used to that kind of humiliation. I had learned to keep quiet to avoid further conflict, to avoid giving them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. But that night, something in me changed. I felt a mixture of sadness, anger, and a silent determination begin to grow inside me. I knew I couldn't continue being that loser to them, that shadow no one wanted to acknowledge. Not that night. So, without raising my voice, without confronting them at that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Because sometimes, the most hurtful words are the fuel we need to prove our true worth. And that was the night I decided I would no longer allow them to define me with their mockery and contempt. I grew up in a family where a person's worth was measured by their achievements, their degrees, their bank account, and how much you made our parents proud. For as long as I can remember, my parents have been strict, demanding, and cold. There was never room for mistakes, doubts, or anything different. Everything had to be done their way, in their time, as they expected. If not, you were a disappointment. My father, in particular, always had an image in his head of what his children should be like. Strong, successful, admired, nothing less. And if you didn't live up to that expectation, then you didn't deserve his respect or his love. My mother, although more silent, was always complicit. She didn't raise her voice, but a glance was enough to make you feel out of place. I grew up with two siblings, Leo and Camila. From a young age, they were considered the brilliant ones, the pride of the family. Leo was the athletic one, the charismatic one, the one who won trophies and had friends everywhere. Camila was the perfect one. She got the best grades, knew how to talk about everything, and always seemed to have the right answer for everything. Me? Well, I was Alex, the one in the corner, the quiet one, the one who preferred to draw, write, build things with his hands. Spend time alone. The one who didn't excel at what my family valued. The weird one. From a very young age, I was labeled as the one who wasn't going to go far. In every conversation, every meal, every get-together, I was a silent joke, the constant comparison. When Leo won an award, my father would sarcastically say to me, "Did you see what real effort is, Alex? You should learn something from your brother." When Camila graduated with honors, my mother looked at me and said, "Not everyone could be that brilliant. Some just weren't born to shine." And that's how that cycle began to form. Each of their successes was an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't up to par. Every mistake I made was magnified, exaggerated, almost as if I did it on purpose to embarrass them. They called me lazy, a dreamer, distracted. Whenever I tried something different, something I was passionate about, like design, technology, or simply helping others, they dismissed it with a "that's useless. That's not a real career." Over time, I stopped telling them about my accomplishments. In fact, I stopped talking to them about anything important to me. Why share something if you already know it will be ignored or ridiculed? I became more withdrawn, more silent, more invisible. Family gatherings became minefields. I knew that at any moment, mockery disguised as a joke, comparison disguised as advice, would come. Sometimes they would ask me, "So what are you doing now, Alex?" And when I started to answer, someone would interrupt with another story about Leo or Camila, as if my life wasn't interesting enough to deserve their attention. Eventually, I stopped receiving support. They no longer consulted me, no longer included me in important decisions, no longer asked my opinion. I became a spectator within my own family. The most painful thing wasn't that they stopped trusting me. It was that they seemed to forget that I also had value, that I was also struggling in my own way. The emotional isolation was progressive, like a constant drip that wears you down until one day you realize you're completely alone. Not because there are no people around you, but because no one really sees you. No one listens to you. No one believes in you. And yet, deep down, I still wish for one thing, that one day they would realize they were wrong, that they would see who I really am, that they would understand everything I kept quiet, everything I achieved in silence, that they would stop seeing me as the failure of the family and start seeing the human being I always was. It all happened on a Saturday night. It was my father's 60th birthday, and like every special occasion, my mother threw a big dinner party at home. Not at our house, of course. I hadn't lived there for years. It was at hers, at the family home. The same one where I grew up feeling like the leftover appendage to a story that wasn't mine. There were golden balloons in the entryway, a banner with giant letters that read, "Happy Birthday, Dad," and a perfectly set table, with glasses lined up as if it were a corporate event rather than a family dinner. There were about 15 of us in total. Uncles, cousins, close friends. And of course, my siblings. Leo, in his perfect suit and his wife smiling as if life owed her something. And Camila, the star, the doctor, the one who had just bought her second apartment. I arrived empty-handed. Not because I hadn't thought to bring something, but because what I brought wasn't wrapped in paper or fit in a box. During dinner, everyone was laughing, sharing anecdotes, toasting Leo and Camila's accomplishments. My mother talked about the new clinic where Camila would be working. My father told how Leo was considering starting his own consulting firm. It was like watching a documentary about another family. I was there, in the corner of the table, invisible. No one asked me anything. No one noticed I had barely eaten a bite. But then, after the third toast, when my nerves were already numbed by the expensive wine and fake smiles, it happened. My father stood up to give a short speech. "I want to thank you all for being here," he said, raising his glass. "It's an honor to reach this age and see everything we built as a family. I have wonderful, successful children who fill me with pride." He paused, looking over to where Leo and Camila were, and then very slowly, he turned his gaze to me. "Well, almost all of my children," he added with a forced smile. "One of them is still searching for their place in the world. Right, Alex? But don't worry, we all need a hobby." Silence. A sharp, awkward silence that lasted barely 2 seconds, but it felt like time had stopped. And then the laughter. First a few, like nervous coughs. Then my uncles, and then my brothers. Even my mother smiled and lowered her gaze, as if this mockery were an innocent prank. As if publicly humiliating me was something she expected. As if I wasn't sitting there, listening to everything. I didn't say anything. I didn't respond. I didn't make a gesture. I simply swallowed, forced a smile, and kept my gaze fixed on my plate. Because what they didn't know, what no one at that table imagined, was that I had indeed brought something. Not in my hands, but in my jacket pocket. A letter. A document. A piece of evidence. Something that would change the way they viewed that dinner. Something that would break the perfect script of that family of appearances. For weeks, I had been preparing this. Silently, without making a sound. Just as I was always taught to behave. But this time it wasn't to apologize. This time it was to make it clear that I wasn't the same Alex they had underestimated for so many years. While they toasted and laughed, I counted the seconds in my head. And when I saw the right moment, when the dessert plates arrived at the table, when euphoria began to fade and our defenses lowered, I slowly got up from my chair. I took a deep breath, and without saying a word, I placed the envelope in the center of the table. My father looked at it with disdain. "What's this?" he asked, with that superior tone he used whenever he thought he was about to win an argument without having won. I smiled, but not with joy, with certainty. "Happy birthday, Dad. I said quietly and turned around. I left that house without looking back. As the door closed behind me, I heard someone ripping open the envelope. Then came absolute silence. A different kind. One that no longer included me as a joke, but as the one who had just ended the show. Outside, the air was cold, but for the first time in years, I felt free. What was in that envelope was going to change everything, and it was just the beginning. I left that house like someone leaving a prison. It wasn't a dramatic exit. There were no screams or slamming doors, just the sound of the lock sliding behind me and my footsteps retreating down the stone path. The envelope was already in his hands. The bomb had already been activated. But to understand what was in that envelope, you first have to understand what I did when no one was looking. You see, it all started the day my father told me, "You can't live on dreams, Alex. Life is for those who get results." I was 19, and I had just told him I wanted to start a business instead of following the same career path as everyone else in the family. I remember his laughter. It wasn't even an argument. He just laughed and told me that if I wanted to play entrepreneur, I should do it without his money. And so I did. I left that house with no savings, no support, and not a single good luck. The little I had was a backpack full of clothes, an old computer I bought through part-time jobs, and a mixture of fear, pride, and stubbornness that became my fuel. For years, I worked in silence. While my siblings celebrated their promotions, their master's degrees, and their weddings with banquets and toasts, I was in cheap coffee shops, building an online store that initially sold nothing. I had failures. Many. More than I could recount without this story becoming a testament to emotional torture. But I learned. Every time a project failed, I tweaked something. I changed my approach. I reinvested the little I earned. I became obsessed with learning. I took free courses at night, read articles until my eyes hurt, studied algorithms, strategies, and investments. While the world slept, I grew silently, like the roots of a tree that no one sees until one day it breaks through the sidewalk. At 23, I launched a second online store, this time from organic products. Within 6 months, I started generating a steady income. Not much, but enough to pay a small rent, quit the 3 jobs I had, and focus solely on that. At 25, I bought my first apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I used a loan and everything I'd saved. And while my family continued to see me as a loser of the group, I signed deeds with a cheap pen and a heart that beat so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't brag. I didn't tell anyone. I learned that silence is the best shield when you live surrounded by people who use your words as weapons. At 27, I reinvested in an educational platform that taught digital skills in Spanish to people without access to formal universities. I partnered with a childhood friend who was a programmer. In the first year, we reached 10 countries. No one in my family knew. At 28, I founded a sustainable design company. We worked with local artisans and young designers who wanted to do more than just survive. We started small. Then investors came in. Then a chain of stores offered us exclusive distribution. I didn't tell anyone about it either. I had a parallel life, one I built brick by brick, while those who claimed to love me trampled on me every time I breathed differently. And at 29, just a few months before that dinner, I bought something more symbolic than any previous achievement. The building where my parents live. Yes, through a limited company, I acquired a property they had always seen as the family jewel. I did it with no intention of revenge. I did it because it was a logical investment. But then that dinner happened, and I decided it was time to tell my story. In my own way. The envelope I left on the table contained several things. A personal letter explaining everything I'd done over the past 10 years, photocopies of property deeds, a financial report for my company, and a final note with just one sentence. Failure has learned to walk in silence and no longer needs your approval. Because what they never understood is that true success doesn't make noise. It doesn't seek validation. It just needs space to flourish. And now that I had all that space, clarity, purpose, it was time to let them know, in my own way, my name was still a joke in that house. Even that night, as I sat at the end of the table, I could feel it in their glances. The condescension, the suppressed laughter, the judgment that needed no words. Dinner was for my mother's birthday. They had decorated the dining room with those expensive flowers they used when they wanted to appear classy. The tablecloth was new. The glasses gleamed. The plates were fine china, the kind they only used when important people came. I, of course, was there as a spectator. It didn't matter that I had arrived on time or that I had brought a delicately wrapped gift. Something always left me out. That night was no exception. My father sat on his usual throne, in the center of the table, dominating the conversation as always. Between laughs, he praised my siblings. Marco got a scholarship in Boston. You knew that, right? And Laura is leading a team of lawyers at only 26. I'm so proud of my children. Then he turned his head, looked at me sideways, and with a mocking smile said, "Well, almost everyone." And there it was, the comment everyone was waiting for, the one that became a tradition at every family gathering. As if for the others to shine, I had to be their shadow. My sister let out a short laugh. My mother looked down at her drink. The others pretended not to hear, but they heard it, as always. And as always, I didn't say anything, until I stood up, not angrily, not dramatically. I simply stood up, slowly, as if I'd been rehearsing this moment for years. And in a way I had. I took a black envelope out of my jacket. I placed it on the table in front of my father. Then I took out a USB drive. I placed it on top. "This is for you," I said in a firm but calm voice. "Happy birthday, Mom." There were no immediate responses, only confusion. My mother frowned. My father looked at the envelope suspiciously. "What is this letter?" he asked. "Sort of," I replied, "but it's more for you than for me." I sat down. I crossed my arms and watched them open it. First, they took out the printed letter. My father started reading aloud, but stopped after the first paragraph. "To all of you who have ever called me a failure, here are some facts that might interest you." He read until his frown deepened. The letter had several documents attached. Copies of deeds, contracts, bank statements, business statements, and property certificates. My sister, curious, took the USB drive and plugged it into her laptop. Legal documents, payment invoices, and then a video appeared on the screen. It was a recording of me, in a glass office, overlooking the city, calmly explaining how I had built an educational technology company that now had a presence in 12 countries. How? Without ever saying so, I had been financier behind many things they thought were owned to them. "That Boston scholarship," I said in the video, "didn't come just because of your grades, Marco. It came because my foundation paid half of your tuition without you knowing. Laura, your firm was founded thanks to an anonymous investment that covered its first year of operation. And Mom, that trip to Paris, the one you thought was a gift from Dad, I paid for it. And the house where you're sitting right now, that house was bought by one of my companies a year and a half ago. The previous owner sold it to them without knowing who the new owner was." Silence. One of my cousins dropped his fork. The metallic sound echoed like a cold echo. No one moved. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father looked down at the envelope. He went back over the papers as if he expected to discover it was a joke. But it wasn't. Seconds later, he turned to me. "What is this? You did all this alone?" I nodded. "Just once." Firmly. "Why didn't you say so?" Laura asked, "Why did you let us continue to think you were a failure?" I interrupted. "Because it suited me. Because silence gave me freedom. And because I knew you wouldn't hear anything that wasn't wrapped in money or power." Silence again. It wasn't revenge. It was an introduction. It was a truth, naked and unvarnished. After years of contempt, mockery, exclusion, I decided to show them who I had been all along. Not to crush them, only to remind them that they knew nothing about me. The food remained untouched. No one ate another bite. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and looked at everyone one last time. "Oh, by the way," I said, "the lease on this house expires next month. Decide if you want to renew it or move out." And I left, just as I had arrived, in silence. But now, everyone knew who I was. After that night, the dynamics of my family changed forever, although not in the way many expected. At first, the silence that followed my revelation was awkward and heavy, as if they had woken up from a long, deep sleep, only to discover that reality was much harsher than they had wanted to admit. That night, there were no more dinners, no texts, no casual calls. Days passed, and the house that had once felt foreign, even hostile, became a strange place where I was no longer invisible, but also not loved. My phone rang more often, but the calls were laden with a strange mix of respect and guilt. My siblings, who had previously seen me as a loser or the outsider, began to look at me differently, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with sadness that seemed to come from recognizing too late what had been right in front of them all along. My father, the man who had so often humiliated me in public, began to call me less frequently, but each call was a clumsy attempt at rapprochement. "Son, I was wrong. What I said that night wasn't fair. I know, Dad, but I'm not looking for you to change the past, just for you to respect the present." My mother, for her part, kept a greater distance, perhaps because it was difficult for her to face that her favoritism and hurtful words had left a deeper wound than she imagined. They tried to apologize, yes, but I learned to listen without forgetting, to not hit back or seek revenge. I distanced myself emotionally, not because I wanted to, but because I understood that my inner peace depended on setting firm boundaries. I wouldn't give in to manipulation or disrespect again. The distance was resentment. It was self-care. The most painful thing was watching my family, that group I thought I knew, have to face the fact that they had underestimated me for years. They had ignored my work, my sacrifices, my dreams. They believed I could not achieve anything. But silently, far from them, I had built a world of which they were now unknowingly a part. Over time, the meetings became more formal, less burdened by past tensions. We were not a united or perfect family, but we were more conscious, more honest. They learned that success is not measured only by words or family approval, but by the ability to keep going, even when they tell you you're not enough. For my part, I found the strength to rebuild my self-esteem and value my achievements without the need for external validation. I understood that respect is earned, yes, but above all, it is demanded. And although I never sat at the table again like before, now that table was mine too, because no one can take away what you build with effort and silence. The family that once ignored me learned, in their own way, that I was stronger than they believed. And I learned that true success isn't proving it to them, but being true to yourself. If there's one thing I've learned throughout this process, it's that you should never underestimate someone just because they don't shout about their success. We live in a society that often values noise, scandal, and exposure more than the quiet, constant work that often happens behind the scenes, away from the eyes of others. I was that someone, the one who seemed to be standing still, the failure at the family table, the person everyone thought wouldn't achieve anything. But while they laughed and ignored me, I was building a solid future, one that didn't need applause or immediate recognition, because I understood something fundamental. True success is patient, it's discreet, and above all, it's for oneself, not to please others. My story isn't just about proving my parents or siblings wrong. It's about learning to respect myself, to value myself, and to stop seeking external approval to feel worthy. I realize that justice doesn't always come in the form of explosive confrontations or visible revenge, but in those small, quiet victories that no one sees, but that change lives. Exposing the truth, showing what I had achieved, wasn't an act of revenge in its most basic form, but a personal vindication. I didn't do it to destroy my family, but to free myself from the weight I've been carrying for years. The feeling of being invisible, of being less than, of being belittled. I want those who listen to me to understand that we all have value that doesn't depend on what others say or think. Don't let anyone label you or let their words define your path. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply moving forward, building in silence, and being true to your dreams, even when the world tells you you're not enough. Silent justice is powerful. It's the kind that doesn't make a sound, but transforms from the inside out. You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, your actions just have to speak with the force of a hurricane. And as for revenge, I learned that the best revenge isn't to harm those who hurt you, but to live so well that they regret having underestimated you. Let them see you rise, grow, shine without needing their approval. To all those who have ever felt humiliated, ignored, or belittled by their own family or close circle, I say, you are not alone. Don't let your muffled voices be lost in the noise of others. Forge your path, even in silence. Your time will come, and when it comes, it will be louder than any hurtful word. Finally, I want to make this message clear. Justice, truth, and dignity don't always manifest themselves in dramatic confrontations or public scandals. Often, true victory lies in learning to love yourself, respect yourself, and value your own efforts, no matter what others say. So, if you've ever been told you're not enough, that you won't achieve anything, or that you're a failure, remember, silence can be your greatest ally. Work on yourself, on your growth, on your happiness, and let your success speak for itself. Never underestimate those who build in silence, because when that person decides to show themselves, there will be no doubt they are unstoppable. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to never give up, to believe in yourselves, and to remember that respect and justice begin with valuing us as we are,